Pete Prisco, senior NFL columnist at CBSSports.com and also NFL analyst at CBS Sports HQ here on the Will Cain Show. What's up, Pete? I'm excited. I'm excited to talk NFL draft.
I'm excited for it to get here. I'll be honest with you. It's amazing, Will, and you know this from being in sports, the paralysis by analysis. I mean, they could actually move this up a month and get the same type of drafting they would get if they wait until April, which is what they do, because it just keeps it in the news cycle. You know how that goes.
I love it, though. I can't get enough. I mean, it's one of my, shameless sports addictions. I read yours and every other mock draft. I do my own on mock draft simulators. I don't understand it psychologically because I know I'm not alone. I think it's just like shopping for men. You know, it's like all 32 fan bases are filled with hope. Oh, we're all excited. We're going to get better today. I don't know. I love the draft.
Oh, I love it too. And believe me, when I was a kid, this is how long I've been around this, watching the draft and paying attention to the draft. When I was a kid, we used to have to listen to it on the radio. That's where it was on a Tuesday. You got your picks on the radio. That's how they announced it. Then when I was at college, I went to Arizona State, so I was out west, and they used to have it on Tuesday, and we'd skip school and have breakfast with the draft and watch it on a Tuesday because it was on a Tuesday. Nobody paid attention to it, but I'm with you. I see the passion. I love it, and I understand it.
I'm a little nostalgic for, I grew up in a small town outside of Dallas, but just waiting for Goose Gosling's, mock draft and in the Dallas Morning News. And I loved it when it was on. What was it? It used to just be 2 days, Saturday and Sunday. So you got up early on Saturday and it was just like your entire day. And everything was more precious then. It was like, okay, you had to wait for that one or two mock drafts to come out and you had those 2 days. Now, to your point, you're inundated with analysis and mock drafts. But at the same time, clearly I have a bottomless pit of appetite for it because even though it was so precious back then, it's like fast food. I just consume it all, man. It's less precious, but still valuable. I don't know. And so here we are today. It's yours. You've put out your mock drafts. As I said, I've read your mock drafts. So let's start with this. How many quarterbacks in this draft make it into the first round?
It's interesting you asked me that, particularly today, because I talked to somebody today. He told me he thinks 6 are going to be gone by pick 15. And I find that hard to believe. And this is somebody in the league, and I find that hard to believe. But when you really look at it, I think 4 for sure will be gone by pick number 6, 4 of them. And J.J. McCarthy being the one that most people didn't have for much of the process going in the top 6, he will. So you're going to have 4 go in the top 6. And then you get to Atlanta. Atlanta's an interesting pick when you consider they signed Kirk Cousins, but he's not a long-term answer. So you could draft a quarterback there if you want to. And Michael Penix's name has been linked to him. So that's a possibility. And then you get to who's the 6th quarterback. That would be Bo Nix. Do I think he's worthy of a top 15 pick? No. But what if Sean Payton, who might see Drew Brees 2.0 in Bo Nix, decides he wants to take a shot on him? Then all of a sudden you have 6 quarterbacks go in the top 15. So do I think it's going to go that way? No, but somebody did tell me that today, which I found surprising.
All right, let's come back to Bo Nix. I have a few questions about him in particular, but the 4 guaranteed to go in the first round are Caleb Williams. It looks like everything is, obviously pointing towards the Chicago Bears with Caleb Williams. Then you have Jaden Daniels and Drake May, North Carolina and LSU, who seem to be second and third. You pointed out the rise of J.J. McCarthy. So every year in the draft, we have quarterback inflation. Guys rise just because they are quarterbacks and teams need quarterbacks. That seems to be the case with J.J. McCarthy. I'm with you. I've read what you've written about your doubts about McCarthy and him being a first-round quarterback. I never watched him and thought, oh, my God, they better do something to stop J.J. McCarthy. But I will say, Pete, he does have this knack of making the play that you need to be made when it needs to be made. So 3rd and 8, and somehow J.J. McCarthy throws for 9 yards. And I do wonder, maybe I missed it because the NFL's in love with him so much so that I'm starting to see, I think it was in your draft, your most recent mock draft, it's not Jaden Daniels. and Drake May second and third. That J.J. McCarthy's not only climbed up to the obvious number 4, but he's breaking into the debate of who's 2 and 3.
There's no question about that. And I don't see it. I'll be the first one to say it. I've said it throughout the entire process. But you do see teams and personnel guys who love him. And one of the things you keep hearing over and over again is the New England Patriots love J.J. McCarthy. And I think it's going to go Caleb Williams, like you mentioned, 1. Then I think it's Jaden Daniels at number 2, even though they brought all the quarterbacks in this week. I think it's Jaden Daniels. And then number 3, I think it's a decision between J.J. McCarthy and Drake May. And I think in the end, I think it will be J.J. McCarthy, at least as of right now, unless I get some late information in the next week. And if that's the case, then I think Minnesota makes the bold move to go up and get Drake May. Minnesota is said to be in love with Drake May. Kevin O'Connell really likes Drake May, but more than that, the quarterback coach, McCown, coached him in high school. So there's a real link there. So I think that's the way it will play out. Now, which team makes the deal? Is it Arizona, or do they stay put and take Harrison? Or is it the Chargers at 5 who move down and allow them to take the quarterback?
So, as you pointed out, it could be 6 quarterbacks. If it is 5 taken in the first round, I saw this put out by Fox College Football. 2021, 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round. 2018, 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round. That's the most, both of those 2 drafts, since 2000, with 5 in the first round. But it's interesting looking at who they are, because of those 10 quarterbacks, only 4 remain starters in the NFL today, which tracks closely to what we know. It's a 50-50 proposition for a first-round quarterback. None of these guys, including Caleb Williams, to me, Pete, are in that Trevor Lawrence, obviously Andrew Luck level of this guy will be a starter in 4 to 5 years. For me, even Caleb Williams, if you're looking at those guys, and we'll just stick with the four obvious ones right now, I feel like it's a crapshoot, like especially among Daniels, May, and McCarthy. Who's the bust and who is on the right side of the stats of becoming a starter?
Well, and I agree with you on Caleb Williams as well. There's a lot to like about his game, but there's a lot of flaws in his game as well. I personally have criticized him. I don't like seeing a guy cry on his mom after a loss from a football game, so that bothered me a little bit as well. But I think there are flaws in all their games. I think he has flaws. He holds the football too long. He looks for the big play too much when he can, there's opportunities. Now, in fairness to him, his offensive line was terrible last year. He was much better the year before when he had Addison at wide receiver. But there are flaws in his game. Jaden Daniels is the most improved player I've ever seen in my entire life. Like I said earlier, I went to Arizona State, watched him as a true freshman. He was okay, got worse, transferred, was okay, and then all of a sudden he's this great quarterback, and he's improved, and that's a good thing. I hear he's one of those guys that's the first one in, the last one out. I love that. But he's thin, and he's really thin. That's a concern. And then, Drake May got worse. And there were reasons for it last year, but he wasn't as good as he was the year ago. That's always concerning. So who's the bust? I think of the 4, I'm going to pick McCarthy as the bust. I don't know if he will be a bust, but because, they all could be serviceable, but I don't think you're going to see 2 or 3 stars out of this group. You might see one. Usually it's 1 star or 1 really good NFL quality starter, a guy that hangs around as a starter and ends up being a backup, and then 1 major bust and 1 guy who's nothing more than a backup for most of his career. But you're right. Track record history says 1 will be a bust, 1 will be okay, and the rest of them will be backups.
Well, and it kind of sounds to me, Pete, like you're saying you think the star, if there is one, is Jaden Daniels.
I do. I would take Jaden Daniels first. He would be my first quarterback taken. Now, you talk to guys in the league, and I watch all the tape, so I keep up with it all. But every single guy that you talk to in the league says that they feel Caleb Williams is generational. I don't see how a 6'1" quarterback like that can be generational, at least to me. That's the way I look at it. Now, I have guys I trust in this league that agree with me, and they've said it to me that they don't see it either. But, I mean, they see it. He's a good player. Don't get me wrong. I think there's a chance for him to be special. But like you said, the slam dunk, I don't see that. as we did with some of the other guys that came out recently. So yeah, I look. History says I was one of the few in this whole process that was on Josh Allen the entire process. I loved him. And people picked him to shreds. And we got to Buffalo. They picked him to shreds. And he wasn't accurate. And if you watch the tape, I always say he was throwing to bouncers and bartenders at Wyoming. That's what the Cowboys. He wasn't throwing to receivers. The balls would bounce off their face masks. Well, he got to Buffalo. He struggled early. And everybody ripped him. And then he became a quality NFL quarterback. I think you have to evaluate what they can become. And I think Jaden Daniels can become a star.
All right, so I'm going to be a smart broadcaster, and I'm going to tease the remaining bits of this quarterback conversation for a little bit later because that's what most people tune in for, to talk about quarterbacks. But my interest lies much deeper, so we're going to indulge some of that. But we're going to start with this. You said, you talk to guys. I've always been fascinated by this. You've been doing this for a long time. And, I'm sure that you do some element of your own talent evaluation, watching tape. You pay attention to the combine, but you also have to talk to scouts and to teams. And part of putting mock drafts together is not just where you think this is what, again, Rick Gosselin would always say, this isn't what I think should happen now. This is what I think will happen in talking to teams. One thing I'm always curious about, Pete, on this is how do you know when they're lying to you? Because they're definitely lying to you, right? Now, that doesn't mean anything about your personal relationships, some of which I'm sure are very valuable. But some of them are pretty hard to balance in this process, I think, because they're just hugely incentivized to not show their cards. So when you're talking to teams about what they're going to do, how do you know whether or not you're being played?
It's interesting that you say that because I've been played before and got played really by a guy that I had great respect for, and he had great respect for me over the years, and he played me. And when he played me, it made me look like an idiot. And when he made me look like an idiot, I flew out there the next month and met with him and told him, I said, of all the people, why me? And he said, well, there was this and I'm not going to get it specific, but he gave me a reason. We smoothed it over, but he played me. And so if he played me,
okay, you going to tell us who?
Be careful. You got to be careful. You got to be careful. So there are certain guys that I really, really trust and I've known for a long time. I don't think they would play me, but most of the stuff I talk to those guys about is the evaluation process more than where they're actually going to pick a guy. And you mentioned it. I do a mock draft, and it comes out next week on who they should take. I do one of those. And 9 times out of 10, I do better with that one than I do with my actual mock draft, which is weird because you wouldn't think that would be the case. But I do one, and that comes out next week. So, but you're right. It's not predictive. It's more of what I think they should do than it is predictive.
Well, so that shows your instinct then. If you're saying what they should do and it's reflecting what is reality, what they will do reflects that they're all trying to play in poker when they're talking to guys like you. Are you going to tell us, by the way? I mean, I don't do things like hide my own curiosity, so I have to ask. Are you going to tell us who played you?
A former GM. He told me that he was good. No, I'm not going to tell you. Yeah. Let's put it this way.
He struggled with it. I could see your face. You were struggling.
It was when Kyler Murray was picked. Let's put it that way. You can figure it out from there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm assuming that means you didn't think he would be picked, and then he was picked. I don't know. It's fine. We'll leave it.
You're right.
There.
You're right. That's exactly right.
Which is a weird thing to do because that was the first overall pick, right? So why do you have to play? That's the one pick you don't have to play. I mean, I don't know why you have to play with that one unless you're trying to get some trade value because you're not all in on the guy. I don't know.
Well, remember there was a baseball. There was a baseball part of it. Remember, there was the baseball part of it.
Right.
He's threatening to go play baseball. So there's where I was used.
Okay. All right. So this is the part that indulges my own curiosity and anybody else out there who has, such an obsession with the draft. Okay. Positions I'm interested in. Tons of offensive tackles. We could say it more broadly, offensive line, because some of these guys, by the way, they all have like similar names. It's a problem this year. Like Troy Fatano and Talisi Fuaga, and then Oluwaseun Fashanu. I don't know, man. There's a lot of names with F's and vowels that make it really hard. and some of them can play guard, and they all played tackle. So, I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan. I own it. I talk about it always. And so I've been paying attention a lot of time to offensive line and who will fall down the domino chart to possibly make it to 24. And almost everybody says it's Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma. But I am kind of curious, like, do you think it will be a run on all these offensive linemen? I mean, to get if it's Guyton for the Cowboys, that means probably 6 other guys, or at least 5 other guys, have already gone somewhere between 6 and 23. So is that what's going to happen? Will there for sure be this run on offensive linemen in the teens?
Yes, I think you're going to see a run on the offensive linemen. I think you'll see Alt will go first. He'll probably go to Tennessee unless the Chargers take him. And we know how Harbaugh likes big people. So I think Alt goes first. I think Machado will go early. I think you'll see Latham go early. Mims will go at some point. I don't know when. You mentioned Guyton. Batano, a lot of people look at him as a guard, but he can play tackle. Fuaga will go in there as well. I think he's a left tackle who can also play guard or right tackle. You're going to see a run on tackles. You'll see 7 or 8 of them go in the first round. But more than that, how do you count Graham Barton too? I mean, Graham Barton played tackle at Duke last year, but most teams see him as an inside player. I think he has a chance to go in the first round. So you'll see 8, maybe the center from Oregon. He might go in the first round. You might see 8, 9 offensive linemen go in the first round.
Something about offensive linemen. So you brought up, Guyton is in this discussion, and so is Mims. And for that matter, so maybe the other guys like Latham and all, but they're just getting really gigantic. Like I've noticed it recently, and I think it's because I have a nephew that plays offensive line at Clemson, and he's now working at center, and he's a huge kid, and he's aggressive, and he's a mauler, and he's smart. But I know how big he is. I mean, he's like 6'3", 315. But now we're talking about at the tackle position, 6'8", 340. I mean, these are legit Goliaths. They're huge. And guys like Mims and Guyton, they have varying degrees of experience. So what you're doing, though, is you're saying all of these traits, huge NFL draft term, all these traits add up to the guy you want. But I do remember that draft, Pete, from a few years ago that had, I think it was the same draft that had Evan Neal, but it also had the guy from Louisville who was gigantic. And was that Mekhi Becton? Mekhi Becton was from Louisville. Yeah, and there was another one like Becton, who I can't remember, who was also like just a giant. But here's what I'm getting at. Like, Becton hasn't been great, and he's had injury issues. So some of these guys, like, I don't think the bust rate is quarterback level, but it's weird how you can take all these traits and you still don't know who's going to be the starting offensive tackle in the NFL.
Yeah, and even Evan Neal, you mentioned him. He's been hurt and banged up the last couple of years. He hasn't lived up to the expectations yet either. So you're right. It's a good point. But here's the other point, though, and why they get a run on them. You mentioned the size, but there's only so many big people on the planet, and offensive linemen will tell you this all the time, who can do what they do. There's only so many of them. And offensive line play has so deteriorated over the years because they don't rep. They don't get the hit. They don't get, part of being an offensive lineman, and I'm sure you could talk to your nephew about it, is working together on, in sync and getting off your blocks and the timing of getting off your doubles and getting to the next level. And when you can't hit, and they don't hit in the NFL, and they don't hit as much in college anymore either, it's hard to get in sync. And plus, the college game is a different game. So it kind of makes it even more challenging for those guys. So the NFL offensive lines have really fallen off in terms of their play. And I think that shows up. That's why the value of the position, if you can get a guy, lock him in, then you don't have to worry about that spot. You can kind of work on the other ones. Then I think there's even more value to that spot.
Okay, two more positions I want to talk. So I'm always fascinated by wide receiver. It seems so deep. By the way, the positions that everyone says are like ridiculously deep are wide receiver, offensive center. You can find a starting level NFL center perhaps in the 4th round of this draft, which is a need for the Cowboys. But wide receiver, I know I've seen you put out some guys. You like the guy from Oregon, but there's a lot of receivers that people seem to like. There's 4 or 5 at the top, and then that's before you get to like the two guys from Texas, Brian Thomas from LSU, Ladd McConkey. It's just like, I don't know. As much as I like a lot of these receivers, it feels like it's so deep. Do you need to take, I'm trying to think who's in the middle ground between Brian Thomas and Romeo Dunze. I'm trying to think somewhere in that ground. It's like, why do I need to? Yeah. Okay, so Adonai Mitchell from Texas. Like, what's the drop off from Mitchell to the guy I can get in the third round?
Well, when you look at it, there's only so many big receivers too. I mean, you can get the smaller receivers in the second and third round, and I like a lot of those guys. By the way, there's a lot of good smaller receivers in this draft. But if you want to get a big, Mitchell's a big physical receiver. I think when you look at Thomas at LSU, big physical receiver. So those guys are probably going to go in that area. You mentioned McConkey. McConkey's an interesting guy. Boy, he's a good football player. But in talking to people even today, he's going to get overdrafted because of the exact same things that you just talked about. There are a lot of guys that you can get in the second and third round, but people are going to overdraft him because they don't want to wait. You're right, though. They're going to see a run on receivers. It's a deep receiver group. I mean, it really is across the board. You mentioned Franklin. A lot of guys don't like Franklin because he's skinny, but he's going to put on weight, and he puts the fear of God defensive backs with that speed, the ability to just take it to the house. There's a big value in that. A smart team is going to get a good player. And could you imagine adding him to the Chiefs? If the Chiefs were sitting there at the back end of the first round and getting a speed guy like that, that would be incredible for them. So I do think you're going to see a big run on receivers.
On that note, like Xavier Worthy is fascinating to me. I mean, I'm a Texas fan as well, so I watched Worthy, but then he goes and runs, and he's good. He's good. And the thing about drops, it's not. I think that's nonsense. He was hurt the year he had drops, and when he's healthy, he's caught the ball. But he runs a 4.21, and so I mean, and he's skinny. By the way, he just fits almost every profile you just said. Like he terrifies me on the Chiefs. But how high will he go? How high? Where do you think Xavier Worthy will be drafted?
I think he's had a chance to be the back end of the first round. I think Mitchell has a chance to be probably the back end of the first round, as does Franklin. I think all those guys are in that group. I think you'll see the little run there at the back end. A lot of those teams, the good teams, need receivers. Baltimore needs another receiver. If you look at the Ravens, and so they like to get another guy for Lamar Jackson in that passing game. So you're going to see a little run on wide receiver there into the back end of the first round, into the early part of the second round. And you mentioned there's a lot of those guys are going to go in that area right there.
All right, so the other position I wanted to ask you about is all we've talked about is offense. And honestly, that's because offense is kind of dominating mock drafts between quarterback, wide receiver, and offensive line. You're eating up into with a few exceptions here, you're eating up into the 20s. And so there will be defensive players, a couple of cornerbacks, and Dallas Turner, the defensive end from Alabama. But what I'm always curious about is when drafts go like this, somebody is going to get a really good player, like a defensive player, that we're going to look back on this and go, how did he go 12th? Like, that's what happens, because everybody is making this run on these offensive positions. I don't know, if I need a defensive player and I'm drafting 13th, 14th, I'd be getting kind of excited. I don't know who that is, Jared Verse, the defensive end from UCLA or who it is, but somebody is going to be underdrafted on defense.
No question. Or the corners. I mean, Mitchell, the corner from Toledo, is a really good player, and Arnold is a heck of a player. I think they're the top two corners. But you mentioned Latu. Latu has the medicals, and if your team checks him out on his medicals, then I think you're going to get a heck of a player. That's the guy to keep an eye on as the steal. You mentioned at 11, 12, 13. If your team passes him on his medicals and you're okay with him and your doctors say it's okay, he's a hell of a pass rusher. You're going to be getting a star pass rusher for a long time if the medicals are cleared. And we don't know that. You've heard, some teams might, some teams might not. And I'm a big believer in you can clear a guy if you want to. They all act like, well, our doctors didn't clear him. If you want him to clear him, you'll clear him. So I think he's cleared for a lot of teams, and the team who gets him is going to get a heck of a pass rusher.
All right, so I'm going to get your predictions on two things. The player that will shock everybody goes higher than every mock draft is predicting and everyone is expecting. Who will be that player? We're like, wow, they really reached, whether or not they did or not. The perception will be they really reached for that player.
Penix. I think Michael Penix is going higher than everybody thinks he is. There's a lot of people don't have him in the first round.
Yeah. I wouldn't think, actually, right now, he'd go in the first round. We're going to come back to quarterback then in a second. So who's the player that everybody thinks is going to go really high, but we're going to be shocked when he's sitting in the green room, maybe even into day two?
Well, that's a tough. I'm going to take a guess and say Mims. I think there's a ton of ability on Mims, but he hadn't played a lot of football, and that's concerning. And there are some scouts who think he's a little lazy. And I watch the tape. I see what they're talking about. But there's also a lot to like. That's why back end of the first round, if you take Mims, you might end up with one of the best tackles in the league, but he also might end up with a guy who's never really a quality starter. There's a lot of risk there, but he has a lot to work with. He just hasn't played a lot of football.
Gosh, I hope he doesn't get past 24 with the Cowboys. Okay, so finally, we go back to quarterback. You brought up Penix. So you liked Josh Allen. I had a daily radio show on ESPN. I talked draft. I talk football all the time. Josh Allen's always one of the most fascinating guys to me because the consensus problem with Josh Allen was accuracy. And I would have quarterbacks come in, former quarterbacks, and tell me it's the one trait that doesn't improve, that you can't learn to become more accurate. I think everyone is revisiting that now because we've seen it not just with Josh Allen. We've seen it with a few guys. We're like, whoa, that's not the 58% passer I saw in college. Now he's a 70% passer in the NFL. But I'm wondering if it works in reverse because you're not big on him. But I've read, to your point, about 6 quarterbacks getting in the first round. Bo Nix, what everybody loves, he's just accurate. He puts the ball where it's supposed to be. So does that accuracy translate and people are accurately big on Bo Nix?
I think Bo Nix, and watching his tape, there are concerns. There are times when Troy Franklin's behind the defense and he's waiting for it. That's concerning to me. But there is also a lot to like about Bo Nix, to your point. He is accurate. He is one of those guys that can command his offense. And you hear from people in the league that when he really had that group rallying around him, almost like a coach on the field. And NFL people love that. And so I could see a team taking a shot on Bo Nix, like the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton, and making him part of their offense where they build it around him like they did with Drew Brees. I'm not saying he's Drew Brees, but I see those kind of comparisons. He's a shorter quarterback. He's not big, doesn't have a great arm. And remember, when Drew Brees came out of Purdue, he didn't have a great arm. He was accurate, but he didn't have a great arm. And he had a command of the offense, but he didn't have a great arm. Then he had the shoulder surgery, and for some reason, Drew Brees' arm got better. Drew Brees had a stronger arm after his shoulder surgery. And one thing guys told me, and I've asked Drew about this when I used to go down there and he was at the Saints, he threw over 100 passes one year where he didn't see the receiver. And I asked him about that. An offensive lineman told me that. I said, how? And he said, just from repping it, knowing where he's going to be, understanding where the receiver is going to be, and throwing it. And to me, that's timing, and that's the kind of quarterback I think people think Bo Nix can be. And if that's the case, and Sean Payton's in Denver with a need at quarterback, you would understand if he took him.
Back in the day, Pete, that's how I always understood quarterback play worked. Because, again, reference Cowboys. Aikman used to talk about that. He didn't see the receiver was open. He knew that he was supposed to be in a certain spot at a certain time and looked for that spot. And then, boom, Irvin would be there by the time the ball arrives, or somebody like that. You do see a lot more quarterback play now, even in the NFL, where it's like, see him open, then throw it. I would think if Bo Nix can do what you just described, maybe he could be the sleeper quarterback in this draft on the plus side of those percentages. It's a fun conversation. I always love it, Pete. Thank you so much. Remember, check out Pete at CBSSports.com. He's got a mock draft coming out on what should happen before next week. And check him out at CBS Sports HQ. Thank you so much, Pete Prisco.
You got it.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.